June 11, 1944, 18,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alex Vraciu checked his gun sight one final time as 50 Japanese aircraft appeared on the horizon like a swarm of angry wasps. Through the curved plexiglass canopy of his Grumman F6F Hellcat, he could see them clearly. Mitsubishi A6M Zeros, the fighters that had terrorized the Pacific for 3 years. Somewhere below that formation, a Japanese pilot whose name history would never record transmitted to his wingman. "Fat American fighters ahead, easy targets, they fly like pregnant cows." The mockery was understandable. The Hellcat weighed 12,500 pounds fully loaded. The Zero weighed 5,300 pounds. The Japanese fighter could turn inside any American aircraft, climb faster, and dance through the sky with an agility that seemed almost supernatural. What that Japanese pilot didn't know was that Alex Vraciu was about to shoot down 6 Japanese aircraft in 8 minutes. What the entire Japanese Naval Air Force didn't understand was that the fat American fighter had been specifically designed to kill Zeros. And it was about to do exactly that on an industrial scale. The F6F Hellcat would destroy 5,156 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat while losing only 270 of its own. A kill ratio of 19-1, the greatest fighter record in aviation history. This is the story of how American engineering transformed Japanese tactical brilliance into a death sentence, how 6 synchronized machine guns rewrote the rules of Pacific air warfare, and how Japanese pilots' laughter turned to terror as they discovered what it meant to fight an opponent that learned from every mistake. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The A6M Zero arrived over Oahu like a messenger from the future. American pilots who survived the attack reported aircraft that could outturn, outclimb, and outmaneuver anything in the American inventory. Wildcats, Buffaloes, P-40S. Every American fighter was inferior in traditional dogfighting metrics. The Zero represented the pinnacle of Japanese fighter philosophy. Chief designer Jiro Horikoshi had created an aircraft optimized for one thing: aerial combat performance. Every ounce of unnecessary weight had been removed. No armor plating protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks guarded against fire. The structure was built to minimum strength standards. The result was an aircraft that could turn in 15 seconds at combat speed, while American fighters required 25 seconds. It could climb to 20,000 feet in 7 minutes, while American fighters needed 12. Its 20mm cannon and 2 7mm. 7mm machine guns could destroy targets at ranges American pilots couldn't reach. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, who would become Japan's 4th highest scoring ace with 64 victories, described the Zero's dominance in early 1942. "We owned the sky completely. American fighters couldn't touch us. They tried to turn with us and died. They tried to climb with us and fell behind. Their only option was to run, and many couldn't even do that successfully." The statistics from the first 6 months of the Pacific War confirmed Japanese confidence. Over the Philippines, Zeros claimed 450 Allied aircraft for minimal losses. Over Singapore, they achieved similar results. Over Java, over Burma, over New Guinea, everywhere the Zero appeared, Allied pilots died. American fighter pilots developed what their commanders called Zero fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing when Japanese fighters were reported in the area. Men who had trained for years became paralyzed with fear when facing an opponent that seemed unbeatable. At the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation on Long Island, New York, chief designer Leroy Grumman read the combat reports with growing alarm. His F4F Wildcat, the Navy's standard carrier fighter, was getting massacred. The math was simple and terrifying. Wildcats were losing to Zeros at ratios approaching 4-1. Something had to change, and fast. The Grumman design team didn't try to build a better Zero, they built the Zero's worst nightmare. Roy Grumman understood something fundamental that Japanese designers had missed. In modern warfare, the aircraft that survives wins. A pilot shot down once is gone forever. An aircraft that brings its pilot home fights again tomorrow. The F6F Hellcat design that emerged in late 1942 violated every principle of Japanese fighter philosophy. It was heavy, it was tough. It prioritized pilot protection over maneuverability, and it was specifically engineered to exploit every weakness in the Zero's design. The numbers told the story of two completely opposite philosophies. The Zero weighed 5,300 pounds loaded. The Hellcat weighed 12,500 pounds, more than double. Japanese pilots looked at those numbers and laughed. Americans had built a truck and called it a fighter. But that weight meant something. The Hellcat's pilot sat behind a 3/8-inch armor plate. Bulletproof glass protected him from the front. The engine was surrounded by armor that could stop 20mm cannon shells. The fuel tanks were self-sealing. Bullet holes closed automatically. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower at sea level and maintained power at altitude. It was an 18-cylinder radial that could absorb battle damage no liquid-cooled engine could survive. Cylinders could be blown completely off, and the engine would keep running. The wings were overbuilt to ridiculous standards. They could handle 14-gram loads, 7 times what would kill the pilot. This meant Hellcat pilots could pull maneuvers that would tear a Zero's wings clean off. The armament was overwhelming: 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing. Total ammunition, 2,400 rounds. Combined rate of fire, 4,800 rounds per minute. At convergence distance, those 6 guns created a cone of destruction that could saw an aircraft in half. Lieutenant Commander John Thach, who had developed tactics to fight Zeros in inferior Wildcats, flew the prototype Hellcat in early 1943. His report back to the Navy was simple: this aircraft will kill Zeros, lots of them. But the real genius of the Hellcat wasn't any single feature. It was the combination of capabilities that exploited every Zero weakness simultaneously. The Zero was light and maneuverable, but fragile. The Hellcat was tough enough to absorb hits and keep fighting. The Zero was fast in level flight, but couldn't dive. The Hellcat could dive at 450 miles per hour and pull out safely. The Zero's armament was effective but limited. The Hellcat carried enough ammunition for sustained combat. Most importantly, the Hellcat could do something the Zero absolutely could not. It could convert speed to altitude instantly through zoom climbs that left Japanese fighters helplessly below. Production began in January 1943. By June, the first Hellcats were reaching carrier squadrons in the Pacific. By August, they were about to make their combat debut over Marcus Island. Japanese intelligence had captured technical data on the new American fighter. Analysis teams studied the specifications and reported back to Imperial Naval Air Force headquarters. The F6F is inferior to the Zero in turning radius, climb rate at low altitude, and maximum speed. American pilots will find it no better than the Wildcat they currently fly. This assessment would prove to be one of the most catastrophic intelligence failures in military history. August 31st, 1943, Marcus Island, Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare led 9 F6F-3 Hellcats from USS Independence toward Marcus Island for the type's first combat mission. Below them, 16 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group climbed to intercept. The Japanese pilots expected another turkey shoot. They had been killing Wildcats for 2 years. This new American fighter looked even fatter and slower. What happened next lasted 90 seconds and changed the Pacific War forever. O'Hare's division spotted the Zeros at 18,000 feet and immediately dove from 22,000. The Hellcats accelerated to 350 miles per hour in seconds, faster than Zeros could achieve in level flight. The Japanese pilots tried to turn into the attack, executing the climbing spiral that had killed so many American pilots. The Hellcats didn't follow them into the turn. Instead, they blew through the formation at high speed, fired quick bursts from their 6 guns, then zoomed back to altitude using their momentum. 3 Zeros fell from the sky in the first pass, burning, disintegrating. Their pilots never understood what happened. 1 second they were maneuvering for advantage, the next second they were dead. The remaining Japanese fighters tried to engage, but the Hellcats refused to fight on Japanese terms. They would dive, fire, zoom climb, then repeat. The Zeros couldn't catch them in the dives, couldn't follow them in the climbs, couldn't escape the 6-gun battery when it opened fire. In 90 seconds, the Americans shot down 6 Zeros without loss. O'Hare's combat report was clinical and terrifying. Enemy aircraft attempted turning combat. We declined. Used speed and altitude advantage. Enemy aircraft highly vulnerable to 50 caliber fire. Observed complete structural failure of 3 targets under sustained fire. The American pilots returned to their carrier in disbelief. They had just fought Zeros, the legendary fighters that had ruled the Pacific, and it wasn't even close. The Zero's famous maneuverability meant nothing against an opponent that refused to turn. Japanese survivors of the Marcus Island raid returned with reports their commanders initially refused to believe. The new American fighter was faster in the dive than anything they'd encountered. It could climb vertically using energy from dives. Its guns destroyed aircraft with single bursts. And most disturbing, American pilots weren't trying to dogfight anymore. Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, now an instructor training new Zero pilots, received the combat reports. He understood immediately what they meant. The Americans have learned. They built an aircraft that fights to our weaknesses instead of our strengths. If our pilots try traditional tactics against this new fighter, they will die. His warning was ignored. Japanese tactical doctrine had achieved victory after victory. The idea that American engineering could overcome Japanese pilot skill was unthinkable. The massacre was about to begin. Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare led a strike package of bombers escorted by Hellcats against the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. 70 Zeros rose to defend the base. The Japanese pilots outnumbered the American escort 3-1. The battle lasted 45 minutes. When it ended, the Americans had shot down 35 Zeros. The Hellcats lost 0 aircraft. Lieutenant, junior grade Ira Kepford, who would finish the war with 16 victories, described the engagement. "They tried to turn with us at first. Big mistake. Our aircraft won't turn like a Zero, but we can hold a turn longer because our engines don't lose power. When they tried to disengage, we caught them in the dive. When they tried to climb away, we followed them up using our speed. There was nowhere for them to go." The kill ratio at Rabaul, 35-0, sent shockwaves through both air forces. American commanders finally understood what they possessed. Japanese commanders finally understood what they faced. But the true revelation of Hellcat superiority came 6 months later during the largest carrier battle in history, June 19th to 20th, 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The engagement that would be remembered forever as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Imperial Japanese Navy launched Operation AGO, gambling everything on one massive carrier strike. They sent 373 aircraft, Zeros, Judies, Jills, against the American Carrier Task Force. The Japanese pilots were mostly inexperienced replacements. The veterans who had terrorized the Pacific in 1941-42 were dead. But Japanese planners believed superior aircraft design and fighting spirit would prevail. The Americans had 450 F6F Hellcats waiting for them. What followed was not a battle, it was a massacre that redefined naval aviation history. The Hellcats flew in coordinated divisions, using radar direction from their carriers to intercept Japanese formations before they could reach the fleet. American pilots had better training, better tactics, better aircraft, and better information. The first wave of Japanese aircraft ran into a wall of Hellcats at 18,000 feet. Lieutenant Alex Vraciu, flying from USS Lexington, found himself alone against a formation of 50 Japanese dive bombers and fighters. What happened next became legendary. In 8 minutes, Vraciu shot down 6 aircraft. His gun camera footage showed Japanese planes literally coming apart under 50 caliber fire, wings folding, fuselages breaking, pilots dying before they could react. Vraciu's radio transmission became famous throughout the fleet. "Hell! This is like an old-time turkey shoot." The nickname stuck, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By the end of June 19th, the Japanese had lost 243 aircraft. American losses, 29 aircraft, only a few to enemy action. Most American losses were operational, aircraft running out of fuel during night recoveries. The Hellcat pilots had achieved something unprecedented in military aviation. They had destroyed a major enemy air force in a single day while suffering almost no losses themselves. Petty Officer Sadamu Kamachi, one of the few experienced Japanese pilots who survived, reported back to his carrier, "The American fighters are everywhere. They coordinate perfectly. Their guns destroy anything they hit. Our pilots don't stand a chance. This is not combat. This is execution." The Japanese Navy had sent 373 aircraft to battle. Only 130 returned. Of those, many were so badly damaged they were pushed overboard as unfixable. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier air power was effectively destroyed in one afternoon. And the weapon that destroyed it was the fighter Japanese pilots had mocked as fat and slow. The Hellcat's success wasn't about superior flying or better courage. It was about engineering that transformed combat into mathematics, where Japanese pilots always lost the equation. The 650 caliber guns created what Grumman engineers called a cone of destruction. At convergence distance, typically set at 1,000 feet, all 6 guns' ballistic paths intersected. Anything in that cone faced 80 half-inch projectiles per second traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was specifically designed to destroy aircraft. The standard combat load mixed armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and standard ball ammunition. The API rounds would penetrate armor, then ignite inside the aircraft. The tracers allowed pilots to walk their fire onto target. The ball ammunition ensured structural damage. Japanese aircraft built light to maximize performance couldn't survive this firepower. A 2-second burst, 160 rounds, would completely destroy a Zero. The wings would fold, the fuselage would break, the unprotected fuel tanks would explode. Captured Japanese pilots described what it felt like to face Hellcat fire. You see the tracers coming? Then your aircraft is shaking apart. Metal is tearing. Fire is everywhere. There's no time to react. From the first hit to death is perhaps 1 second. The Hellcat's ammunition load, 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 total, meant pilots could engage multiple targets without worrying about running out. Japanese pilots, by contrast, carried only 60 rounds for their 20mm cannon. They had to make every shot count. American pilots could spray and adjust, but the Hellcat's real advantage was durability. When Japanese aircraft managed to hit Hellcats, and they did, the American fighters absorbed damage that would have destroyed any Japanese aircraft. Lieutenant James Swope returned to USS Hornet on July 4, 1944, with his Hellcat shot full of holes. Japanese pilots had hit him with 20mm cannon fire and 7.7mm machine gun fire. His aircraft had taken 37 hits. The engine cowling was shredded. The left wing had a hole you could crawl through. The vertical stabilizer was half gone. The canopy was shattered. Swope himself was wounded by shell fragments. The Hellcat brought him home. Ground crew counted the damage and took photographs. The aircraft was repaired and flying again within 48 hours. In that same engagement, 3 Zeros were hit by Hellcat fire. All 3 disintegrated immediately. This durability created a pilot pipeline advantage. Japanese pilots shot down once were gone forever. American pilots shot down could bail out, get rescued, and return to combat. By 1944, some American pilots were flying their 3rd or 4th aircraft after being shot down repeatedly. The Americans were building institutional knowledge while the Japanese were losing it. American pilots developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the Hellcat's advantages against Zeros. The doctrine was simple: never fight on Japanese terms. The Thach weave, developed by Lieutenant Commander John Thach for Wildcats, proved even more effective in Hellcats. 2 aircraft would fly side by side at slightly different altitudes. When a Zero attacked one, that pilot would turn toward his wingman. The Zero, committed to its attack, would cross in front of the wingman's guns, dead. The Japanese tried to counter the Thach weave, but couldn't. The tactic required precise coordination and mutual trust. American pilots had both. Japanese pilots, increasingly inexperienced and poorly trained, had neither. The boom and zoom tactic became standard doctrine. Hellcats would patrol at 20,000 feet or higher. When Japanese aircraft appeared below, the Hellcats would dive, fire, and zoom back to altitude. The Zeros couldn't follow them up, couldn't catch them in the dive, and couldn't escape the guns. Japanese pilots tried everything to counter American tactics. They attempted to force turning combat. The Hellcats refused. They tried to use altitude advantage. American radar detected them first. They tried night attacks. American night fighter Hellcats with radar shot them down in darkness. By late 1944, Japanese pilots were being sent into combat with less than 100 hours of total flight time. American pilots had over 300 hours before seeing combat, including more than 50 hours in the Hellcat specifically. The disparity showed in combat reports. Experienced Japanese aces could sometimes survive against Hellcats by refusing engagement. New pilots died within minutes of contact. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, who would become the Navy's top ace with 34 victories, all in the Hellcat, described combat against inexperienced Japanese pilots. They would try to turn away, I'd follow them down, fire a burst, and they'd come apart. It wasn't combat, it was target practice. I almost felt sorry for them. McCampbell's most famous engagement came on October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. He and his wingman encountered 60 Japanese aircraft, just 2 Hellcats against 60 Japanese fighters and bombers. McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, his wingman shot down 6. They forced the entire Japanese formation to jettison their bombs and retreat. 2 Hellcats defeated 60 Japanese aircraft. The combat report was filed and verified. American commanders initially didn't believe it, but gun camera footage, multiple witness accounts, and wreckage confirmed every claim. The Hellcat had transformed the Pacific War from a struggle to a slaughter. By early 1945, Japanese pilots referred to Hellcats as Iron Demons, aircraft that couldn't be killed and couldn't be escaped. The psychological impact was total. Japanese training commands tried to develop new tactics. They ordered pilots to avoid combat with Hellcats unless conditions were absolutely favorable. But in the Pacific War, conditions were never favorable for Japanese pilots. American carriers operated with impunity, launching strikes whenever they wanted. Japanese air bases were constantly under attack. The initiative belonged completely to the Americans, which meant Hellcats chose when and where to fight. Japanese aircraft production tried to counter the Hellcat threat. They developed the A7M SAM, an upgraded Zero with more power and better protection. Too few were built. The N1K George was fast and well-armed. It arrived too late and in insufficient numbers. The J2M Jack was purpose-built to counter American bombers. Hellcats shot them down anyway. Nothing worked. The Hellcat's combination of firepower, durability, and performance created an aircraft that dominated everything Japan could produce. The statistics by war's end told a story of complete superiority. Total Hellcat production: 12,275 aircraft. Total air-to-air victories: 5,156 confirmed. Total Hellcat losses to enemy aircraft: 270. Kill ratio: 19-1. Percentage of all U.S. Navy Marine air victories: 56%. Top 5 Navy aces all flew Hellcats. American aces created in Hellcats: 306. No other fighter in history achieved comparable results. The Japanese tried kamikaze attacks as a desperate counter. If they couldn't win dogfights, they'd turn their aircraft into guided missiles. Hellcats shot down kamikazes by the hundreds before they could reach American ships. On February 16, 1945, Hellcats from Task Force 58 struck airfields around Tokyo. In a single day, they destroyed 332 Japanese aircraft, most on the ground, but 102 in air combat. American losses: 16 Hellcats, mostly to anti-aircraft fire. The Japanese were losing aircraft faster than they could build them. They were losing pilots faster than they could train them. They were losing the war one Hellcat engagement at a time. Behind the statistics were human beings whose lives ended in fire and terror at 20,000 feet. Petty Officer Kiyoshi Ito, 19 years old, died on his 3rd combat mission when Hellcats intercepted his formation over Iwo Jima. His aircraft was hit by .50 caliber fire and exploded. His body was never recovered. Seaman Takeshi Nakamura, 20 years old, survived being shot down 3 times before dying on his 4th mission, when a Hellcat pilot fired a 2-second burst that cut his Zero in half. Flight Petty Officer Hiroshi Nishizawa, Japan's top ace with 87 victories, survived years of combat only to be killed riding as a passenger in a transport aircraft shot down by Hellcats over the Philippines. The Japanese lost approximately 10,000 pilots in combat against American forces in the Pacific. The majority died facing American carrier aircraft, predominantly Hellcats. Each loss represented years of training Japan couldn't replace. By comparison, American pilot losses in the Pacific were approximately 2,600 total, and most of those were operational accidents, not combat. The Hellcat's survivability meant even pilots shot down often came home. The families back in Japan received only brief notifications: "Your son died heroically serving the Emperor." No details. No explanation that their sons had faced an opponent they were never trained to defeat, flying aircraft that couldn't protect them. In 1982, at a reunion of American and Japanese pilots in San Diego, former adversaries met in peace. The Japanese veterans, now elderly men, were asked about the F6F Hellcat. Former Petty Officer Saburo Sakai, who survived the war despite facing Hellcats numerous times, gave the most honest assessment. "We made a terrible mistake. We built aircraft for the pilots we had in 1941, highly trained, experienced veterans who could exploit the Zero's performance. The Americans built aircraft for the war they knew was coming. A long struggle where durability and firepower would matter more than agility. The Zero was beautiful. The Hellcat was ugly. But beauty doesn't matter in war. The aircraft that brings its pilot home wins. The Hellcat brought pilots home. The Zero turned pilots into falling stars." Former Lieutenant Commander John Thach, who developed tactics against Zeros and later flew Hellcats, added perspective. "The Japanese pilots were incredibly brave. Their aircraft were remarkable for their time, but they were fighting 1930s air war in the 1940s. We moved on, they didn't. Technology won." Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, spent his post-war years designing civilian aircraft. In a 1970 interview, he reflected on his most famous creation. "I designed the Zero to be light and fast. I succeeded, but I didn't design it to survive. In a short war, that would have been acceptable. In a long war, it was fatal. The Americans understood something I didn't. In modern warfare, attrition matters more than performance." The F6F Hellcat retired from frontline service in 1954, replaced by jets, but its combat record remained unmatched. No fighter before or since achieved a 19-to-1 kill ratio in comparable combat. The story of the Hellcat versus the Zero is ultimately a story about different philosophies of warfare colliding at 300 miles per hour. Japan built aircraft optimized for individual pilot skill. America built aircraft optimized for industrial warfare. Japan assumed a short war where quality would overcome quantity. America prepared for a long war where quantity would become quality. The Japanese were right that the Zero could outturn the Hellcat. They were right that their pilots initially were better trained. They were right that agility mattered in dogfights. But they were wrong about what kind of war they were fighting. The Americans didn't try to outturn the Zero. They built an aircraft that didn't need to. They created a fighter that could absorb damage and keep fighting, that could engage on American terms only, that could be produced by the thousands and flown by adequately trained pilots to victory. The F6F Hellcat destroyed 5,156 Japanese aircraft because it was engineered to do exactly that. Every design decision, the armor, the guns, the engine, the structure, was optimized to kill Zeros while keeping American pilots alive. Japanese pilots laughed when they first saw it. Fat, slow, ugly. Another American failure. They stopped laughing when those 6 guns opened fire and their beautiful, agile, delicate Zeros disintegrated under streams of 50 caliber bullets. The laughter died at 20,000 feet over the Pacific, drowned out by the thunder of American guns that proved a simple truth. In modern war, the aircraft that survives matters more than the aircraft that dances. The Hellcat didn't dance, it just won. And 5,156 Japanese pilots paid the price for their initial mockery, with their lives, their aircraft, and their nation's dream of Pacific dominance. The sky belonged to the ugly American fighter that refused to fight fair, refused to follow the rules, and refused to die. The Japanese had mocked its design. The Hellcat's response was written in smoke trails and falling debris across the entire Pacific theater. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, there were no Japanese pilots left who still laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Iron Demon had silenced them all.